Chapter 29, Confessions. I held her, my grip possessive, almost desperate, yet somehow also fragile. As if she might vanish, a sea nymph returning to the depths, if I loosened my hold even a fraction. We were both shivering now, the adrenaline that had fueled our frenzy, that had turned us into wild, untamed creatures, receding, leaving the chill of the ocean and the overwhelming, terrifying weight of what we had just done in its wake. The cove, which had felt like our own private paradise, a sanctuary from the world, a space outside of time and consequence, now seemed vast and exposed, the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the rocks a constant, almost taunting reminder of our vulnerability, of our nakedness, both literal and starkly emotional. My mind, which had been gloriously, blissfully blank, a pure, white-hot focus on her, on the feel of her, the taste of her, the scent of her, on Daphne, began to reboot, to process, to analyze, to panic. Shit. The ripped panties lost to the waves, a fucking symbol of our recklessness, of my impulsiveness. Her ruined dress a sodden, clinging mess. The inevitable stares, the whispers, the judgment we'd face back at the party. My father's cold, disapproving gaze, a gaze that could freeze hell over. My mother's carefully veiled disappointment, so much more painful than any outright anger. The inevitable taunts and insinuations. It all came crashing down, a tidal wave of potential consequences, threatening to drown me. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to block it all out, to cling to the fading embers of our passion, to the memory of Daphne's cries, her body arching against mine, the feeling of complete and utter connection. But it was no use. Reality was a relentless tide. I felt her shift lightly, pulling back just enough to look at me. I opened my eyes, forcing myself to meet her gaze, bracing myself for what? Accusation, regret, tears, revulsion. Her eyes, usually so expressive, so full of life and vibrant, challenging energy, were shadowed, uncertain, filled with a vulnerability that mirrored my own and yet somehow pierced me to the core. She looked younger, smaller, fragile. And incredibly beautiful, even with her hair plastered to her face, her makeup smeared, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. The carefully constructed facade of Daphne the artist, the independent, the untouchable, the woman who had so skillfully kept me at arm's length, had dissolved, washed away by the sea in our shared passion, leaving behind the woman, the girl, she truly was. And I had done that. I had stripped her bare, both literally and figuratively. And the responsibility, the sheer weight of that realization nearly buckled my knees. "Polo," she began, her voice a shaky whisper, barely audible above the sound of the waves. It was a question, a plea, a cry for help, a confession, all wrapped up in one syllable. My name. God, even her voice was different, stripped of its usual playful, teasing tone, devoid of the confident sarcasm she used as a shield. I didn't know what she wanted me to say. Am I okay? Was that a mistake? What happens now? Do you regret this? I didn't have the answers. I was drowning in the same turbulent sea of uncertainty, of fear, of a strange, terrifying exhilaration. I traced the line of her jaw with my thumb, a desperate attempt at tenderness, at reassurance, a pathetic, almost instinctive attempt to bridge the chasm that had suddenly, inexplicably opened between us, threatening to swallow us whole. "Daphne," I echoed, my voice hoarse, rough, a betrayal of the turmoil inside me, a far cry from the smooth, confident tones I usually employed. I couldn't offer answers, only her name, spoken like a question, a plea, an anchor in the storm, a fragile lifeline. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, suffocating, filled only by the relentless rhythm of the ocean, the sound of our ragged breathing, the distant, muted sounds of the party, a lifetime away, a different universe. I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, a cold fist clenching around my heart, that I was just as lost as she was. More so, perhaps. Because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this had changed everything. We'd crossed a line, jumped off a cliff, burned all the bridges, and I had no fucking clue where we were going, or how we were going to get there, or if we'd even survive the journey. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some casual conquest, another notch on my bedpost, another story to be bragged about in the hallowed halls of the fraternity. This was real. And it terrified me more than anything I'd ever faced. I took her hand, my fingers interlacing with hers, needing the physical connection, the reassurance of her presence, the solid proof that she was still here, that this wasn't some fever dream. My own hand trembled, betraying my carefully cultivated composure. shattering the illusion of Polo Reyes, the effortlessly cool, perpetually in control fraternity president. The feel of her hand in mine, small and delicate yet surprisingly strong, was the only thing grounding me, keeping me from spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, to reassure her, to reassure myself, but the words wouldn't come. I cleared my throat, the sound pathetically awkward, a strangled rasp in the vastness of the night. "We should probably get back," I said finally, the words sounding forced, hollow, utterly inadequate even to my own ears. It was a pathetic understatement, a lame attempt to regain some semblance of control, to impose some order on the chaos. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay here, in this broken, beautiful aftermath, with Daphne, wrapped in the cocoon of our shared vulnerability, forever. Or at least until the sun came up and forced us to face reality. But I knew we couldn't. We couldn't hide from the world, from the consequences of our actions. She nodded, a single, jerky movement, and I saw the reality of our situation reflected in her eyes, the dawning horror, the fear, the understanding that the bubble had burst. We were soaking wet, practically naked, shivering in the cold night air, and a long, cold, potentially humiliating walk away from the party, from the world we'd so carelessly abandoned. The magic had evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard truth, and the daunting prospect of facing the music, of dealing with the fallout. My bravado, my carefully constructed persona, had vanished like sea foam, leaving me feeling exposed and utterly, completely lost, adrift in a sea of my own making. I looked down at our joined hands, a small, fragile connection in the overwhelming darkness. It was all I had.